The San Francisco Bay at night looks almost peaceful. Moonlight glints off black water, and the distant city skyline twinkles like a promise just out of reach. But in 1962, for the men locked inside the most notorious prison in America, that twinkling skyline was the cruelest sight of all, close enough to dream about, but impossible to touch. At least, that's what the guards thought. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a statement. The government built it to hold the people they couldn't trust anywhere else. Gang leaders who ran empires from behind bars, escape artists who'd slipped out of every other lockup, and killers whose eyes were as cold as the water surrounding the island. Here, the rules were different. The walls were reinforced concrete, the doors solid steel. Every cell was the same, 5 feet wide, 9 feet long, with nothing but a cot, a sink, and a toilet. No privacy, no comfort, no chance. The bay was the final layer of security, frigid, churning with deadly currents, and home to sharks big enough to make even the toughest inmate hesitate. The official line from the prison warden was clear. You could swim for it, but you wouldn't make it. But among the prisoners was a man named Frank Morris. Morris had been locked up most of his life. Orphaned young, he grew up in foster homes and juvenile halls, learning early that rules were made to be bent, and bars were meant to be tested. His IQ is off the charts, the kind of mind that could memorize a blueprint after one glance. And he had a skill no guard could predict: patience. When he arrived on Alcatraz, Morris didn't act out, he didn't pick fights, he didn't even talk much. Instead, he studied the routines, the guards, the timing of cell checks, even the way the walls sounded when he tapped them. And then there were the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, two farm boys from Florida who could handle their way around tools and had been swimming in cold rivers since they could walk. They'd been caught robbing banks, but in the world of prison escapes, they were gold. The three men started spending more and more time together in the yard. To the guards, it looked harmless, but behind those casual conversations was a plan, one so ambitious, so dangerous, that if they got caught, they'd be transferred somewhere far worse than Alcatraz, if they survived at all. For weeks, the bay wind howled through the cell block, rattling metal doors and whistling through vents. The noise was constant, almost enough to drown out the faint scrape, scrape, scrape coming from the back of certain cells. The guards never noticed it. They didn't know that inside those cells, Morris and the Anglin brothers were turning spoons into chisels, stealing bits of sandpaper from the prison workshop, and digging through concrete inch by inch towards something the world believed didn't exist: a way out of Alcatraz. And one quiet night in 1962, that scraping sound would stop, because the hole would be big enough for a man to crawl through. The clang of the morning bell echoed through the long, dim corridor of Alcatraz. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixed with the faint scent of salt water drifting in from the bay. Frank Morris rose from his cot like clockwork, slipping into the same motion he had practiced for years, a quiet, deliberate routine that drew no suspicion. But today, his eyes weren't on the guards. They were on the small, crumbling edge of concrete just beside the vent at the back of his cell. That crack was no accident. It had been growing slowly, invisibly under the cover of night for months. A spoon here, a nail there, sometimes a makeshift chisel carved from a stolen motor part from the prison workshop. The sound of metal scraping concrete was dangerous, but Frank had learned to mask it under the blare of the prison's music hour, or during the echo of flushing toilets, when every sound bounced wildly off the cold walls. Clarence Anglin, working 2 cells away, was on the same schedule. His younger brother, John, was in perfect sync too. The 3 men had built an unspoken language, quick glances, coded phrases, and silent nods in the mess hall. No notes, no whispered conspiracies in the yard. Just trust, and timing. The plan was insane, but it was their only way out. Escape from Alcatraz wasn't just about breaking out of a cell. It meant surviving freezing waters, evading patrols, and reaching the mainland before hypothermia set in. The guards believed it couldn't be done. The warden boasted that no one had ever escaped the rock alive. Frank intended to prove him wrong. The key was the workshop. Frank had discovered a treasure trove hidden in plain sight: discarded saw blades, scrap wood, and old raincoats. The Anglin brothers worked in the prison furniture shop, which gave them the perfect cover to smuggle out tools. Piece by piece, they built what looked like a pile of harmless junk. In reality, it was becoming the skeleton of a raft. But the raft was only half the story.
They needed to disappear inside their cells long enough to buy time. That's where the papier-mâché heads came in. Using soap, toilet paper, and paint from the hobby shop, they crafted eerily lifelike faces. They even used real hair stolen from the prison barbershop to make them convincing. On the night of the escape, those dummy heads would rest on their pillows, fooling the guards during head count. By late spring, the vent holes behind their cells were wide enough to squeeze through, but only just. Every night, Frank would push himself through to the utility corridor, heart pounding as the cold draft of the prison's hidden spaces wrapped around him. One wrong sound, one unexpected guard patrol, and it would be over. The plan was nearly complete, but the tides, the winds, and the cold currents of San Francisco Bay could be their final, silent executioners. Still, in Frank's mind, there was no turning back. Every scrape of concrete was a heartbeat closer to freedom. The night of June 11, 1962 began like any other in the cold, damp cell blocks of Alcatraz. Guards did their usual head counts. Lights dimmed to a dull yellow glow. The steel bars cast long shadows across the concrete floors. But behind the walls of cells 138, 140, and 144, something was in motion. Something that had taken over 2 years of quiet, calculated preparation. Frank Morris, the mastermind, sat cross-legged on his cot, appearing calm. In his cell, a carefully painted plaster head lay under his blanket, complete with human hair stolen from the prison barbershop. It looked so real, even in dim light, that any passing guard would think he was sleeping. On either side of him, brothers John and Clarence Anglin were doing the same. They too had crafted their own dummy heads, each one a decoy in case a guard peeked in. Tonight was different. This wasn't another rehearsal. This was it. For months, they'd been digging around the vent openings at the back of their cells, using stolen spoons and a makeshift drill built from a vacuum cleaner motor. The holes were now just big enough for them to slip through into an unguarded utility corridor. One by one, the men crouched and wriggled through the openings, pulling with their arms, pushing with their feet, their ribs brushing the jagged edges of concrete. Behind the cell block, they climbed a network of pipes up to a hidden landing space above the cell tier, a dark, dusty attic they'd discovered during their planning. Up there, their makeshift tools waited. A raft and life vests made from over 50 raincoats stitched and glued together. The materials had been smuggled into the attic in pieces over weeks, each trip hidden within the bustle of prison chores. The men worked fast but quietly. Any sound too loud could echo down into the cell block. Using an accordion as a bellows, they inflated the raft, its rubbery skin glistening faintly in the dim light of their prison-made workshop. By the time they were ready, the prison was deep in silence. Midnight had passed. They climbed up a ventilation shaft, pushing aside a fan grill they'd carefully loosened over months. The cool night air hit their faces. Above them, the roof of Alcatraz stretched out like a runway toward the dark waters of San Francisco Bay. They moved like shadows, hauling their raft and supplies across the slick tar roof toward the northeast edge. Below, the waves crashed against the jagged rocks. The icy wind carried the smell of salt and danger. By 10 minutes after 1 a.m., they were at the water's edge on the northeast shoreline. No guard towers had spotted them. The city lights glittered in the distance, a silent promise of freedom. They slid the raft into the water, climbed in, and began paddling into the cold blackness of the bay. The prison behind them loomed like a dark fortress, but it was no longer their world. Ahead, only the uncertain stretch of sea and the hope of making it to shore before dawn. No one saw them leave. No one ever saw them again. June 11th, 1962. The night air over San Francisco Bay was cold, a bone-deep chill that made even the waves shiver. Inside Alcatraz, the lights were dim, the guards making their rounds with the same routine they'd done 1,000 times. Nothing seemed out of place. But behind 3 cell doors in Block B, an elaborate deception was holding its breath. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers lay motionless in their beds, or so it appeared. In truth, the men in those bunks were nothing more than heads made of soap, toilet paper, and real human hair stolen from the prison barbershop. Each one positioned just right, so in the darkness, a guard's quick glance would see nothing unusual. The real men were not in their cells at all. They were crouched in the pitch-black utility corridor behind the cell block, where for months they'd been secretly hollowing out the walls. Every scrap of removed concrete had been hidden inside accordion cases or flushed down the toilet. The openings they'd carved were barely big enough to squeeze through. Tonight, they were using them.
Morris led the way, his wiry frame slipping through the narrow hole. The brothers followed, carrying a makeshift raft they had spent weeks stitching together from stolen raincoats. The material had been glued with a paste made from old paint and sealed tight. Every detail had been planned: the raft, the wooden paddles, even life vests. They climbed up a utility shaft, past rusty pipes, until they reached the roof. The metal groaned under their weight. One wrong sound could mean the end. They stopped, frozen, listening for footsteps. None came. From there, they slid down a 50-foot vent pipe at the north end of the prison and made their way to the ground. At the shore, the black water of the bay stretched endlessly before them, frigid, violent, unforgiving. The city lights twinkled far in the distance, like a taunt. Without hesitation, they inflated the raft. The sound of air rushing into the chambers was muffled by the crashing waves. Time was running out. At 10:30 p.m., 3 shadows pushed off from the edge of Alcatraz Island, disappearing into the night. The guards wouldn't discover the deception until the next morning, when a routine bed check revealed the chilling truth. The cells were empty, the dummies still staring back with painted eyes. By then, the rock had been breached. The night of June 11th, 1962, began like any other at Alcatraz. Guards patrolled the tiers, the clang of steel doors echoed down the concrete corridors, and the dim hum of the generator filled the air. But behind cell block B, 3 inmates, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, were about to attempt the impossible. For months, they had chipped away at the crumbling concrete around the air vents with spoons stolen from the mess hall. At night, they drowned out the noise of their scraping with the sound of a hidden accordion, played just loudly enough to mask their work. The tunnels they carved were just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. On that final night, they slipped through the holes, climbed the utility corridor, and made their way to the prison's roof. There, in the freezing darkness, they hauled out their homemade raft, stitched together from over 50 raincoats and sealed with stolen glue. At 10:30 p.m., the 3 men disappeared into the black waters of San Francisco Bay. The next morning, guards found nothing but their dummy heads made of plaster, paint, and real hair lying on their neatly made beds. The official story? They drowned. The bay's currents were unforgiving, the water temperature lethal.
The FBI closed the case in 1979, declaring them dead. But over the decades, strange sightings, cryptic letters, and whispered rumors suggested otherwise. Had they really perished that night? Or had they vanished into history as the only men to ever escape America's most notorious prison? The official report said the men drowned, but not everyone believed it. Within days, whispers began circulating. A fisherman claimed he'd seen a small homemade raft drifting near the marine headlands. Another swore he saw 3 men on shore, soaking wet, shivering, but alive. The FBI dismissed them all, conveniently. Then came the strange postcards, the unsigned Christmas cards sent to the FBI's San Francisco office with handwriting eerily similar to Clarence Anglin's. The cryptic phone calls to family members, the quiet knocks on doors in the middle of the night, and the people who swore they'd spotted the brothers in Brazil or Mexico or even on a remote farm in Florida. For decades, the official file stayed closed, yet every so often a new piece of evidence would surface, a faded photograph of 2 men in sunglasses on a farm in South America. The facial recognition experts said it was highly likely to be the Anglins. The public was left to wonder, had they really pulled it off? Had 3 men outsmarted the most secure prison in the world and simply vanished into history? And if they did, where are they now? Because somewhere, out there, an old man might still be walking free, carrying the greatest secret Alcatraz ever held. The next morning, the air inside the house felt heavy, almost too still, as if it were holding its breath. Ethan woke up early, the light barely spilling through the curtains, and found Claire already in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she nodded toward the dining table. Lying there was the old leather-bound journal they'd found behind the wall. It was open to a page neither of them remembered reading before. A page dated June 14th, 1974. In rushed handwriting, the entry read, "If someone finds this, know that it wasn't an accident. They wanted her gone, and I think I'm next."
Ethan felt the skin on his neck prickle. Claire's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "This wasn't just someone's diary. This is a warning." They began flipping through the pages, scanning for more clues. The handwriting became messier with each entry, the words harder to read, as though the writer's fear was growing with every day. Mentions of late-night knocks, footsteps in the attic, and the smell of smoke in the walls appeared again and again. Then they found something stranger, drawings. Small, detailed sketches of the house, but in each sketch there was a figure, a man in a long coat, standing in different corners of the rooms, always turned away, always watching. Claire's breathing quickened. "Do you think," she hesitated, "that he's still here?" That night, they decided to search the attic. It wasn't easy to get to. The entrance was a square panel in the hallway ceiling, with a pull-down ladder that groaned under Ethan's weight. The attic was dusty, smelling of old insulation and mildew. Their flashlights cut thin beams through the darkness, revealing stacks of boxes and piles of yellowed newspapers. Then in the farthest corner, Ethan spotted something odd, a section of the wall where the boards didn't quite match. He ran his hand along it, and one plank shifted slightly under his touch. Claire crouched beside him. "It's hollow." They exchanged a look. Ethan pried the loose board back. Behind it was a narrow cavity, and inside, a glass jar. The jar was filled with something black, murky. Floating in it was a strip of paper. Ethan carefully twisted off the lid, the air inside stale and sour. The paper unfolded easily. The ink faded, but still readable. "I see you reading this." The sound of the ladder shifting echoed behind them. They weren't alone in the attic.
The raft bobbed violently on the black water, each wave threatening to flip it. Clarence clung to the side, his knuckles white, his breath ragged. Frank and John took turns paddling with their makeshift oars, each stroke sending ripples toward the invisible horizon. The lights of Alcatraz faded behind them, a dim glow in the mist, while ahead, San Francisco was nothing but a suggestion, a darker shadow beyond the Black Sea. The current was strong, dragging them sideways. Frank shouted over the wind, "We have to fight it! Keep the angle!" His voice cracked with strain. The war was colder than they had imagined, sharp, biting, almost alive in the way it seeped through their clothes, gnawed at their bones. John felt his legs going numb, but he forced them to stay tucked under the raft. If he lost contact, he'd drift away in seconds. Somewhere to the north, a foghorn bellowed, deep, mournful, and too close. They froze, listening for the sound of an approaching boat, but it was just the tide, pushing its weight around the bay. Their breaths came in clouds. Time slowed. Every paddle felt like an eternity. The black expanse around them seemed endless, each splash echoing into nothing. Then, something shifted in the air. A faint scent, carried on the wind. Damp wood, damp sand, and smoke. Land. The adrenaline surged. Clarence, shivering violently, muttered through chattering teeth, "We're close." But the bay wasn't done with them. The current shifted again, pulling hard toward the Golden Gate, where the dark mouth of the ocean waited. The brothers fought back, muscles screaming. Frank's hands were bleeding, the wood of the oar cutting deep grooves into his palms. Somewhere ahead, waves slapped against something solid, rocks. Their raft scraped, then lurched, spilling them into the icy shallows. They stumbled, half swimming, half crawling, dragging the raft with them, until their knees sank into wet sand. They collapsed in the darkness, gasping, their bodies trembling from exhaustion and cold. Above them, the city slept, its lights dimmed by fog. They had made it, at least to land, but freedom was still a fragile thing. The bay had let them go, but would the world? The storm that had rolled in overnight finally began to break by the early hours of June 12, 1962. As the morning sun forced its way through ragged clouds, the water surrounding Alcatraz looked deceptively calm. On the island, the air was tense, the usual rigid order shattered.
By now, the fake heads in the 3 beds had been bagged and tagged as evidence. Reporters had caught wind of an escape from the rock and were already crowding the San Francisco shoreline, shouting questions at guards who had been ferried back to the mainland for statements. The warden, visibly rattled, kept repeating one line to the press. If they made it into the water, they didn't make it out alive. The Coast Guard had scoured the bay since dawn. Choppers thudded overhead, their spotlights stabbing at the waves. Patrol boats zigzagged the water, while officers scanned the tide lines along Angel Island and the Marin Headlands. Every searcher knew the bay's waters were unforgiving, icy cold, with a relentless current that could drag even the strongest swimmer under. Yet there was something nagging at some investigators. The makeshift raft the Anglins and Morris had crafted was no crude lash-up. It was meticulously designed. The stitching in the seams of the raincoat panels was tight, almost professional. Whoever had helped them or taught them knew what they were doing. And then came the first piece of evidence from beyond the island. Around noon, a small patrol boat spotted something floating near the Golden Gate Bridge, a paddle. The wood was smooth, wrapped at the handle in tape. It matched the style the men were believed to have built in the workshop. Hours later, on a beach not far from Stinson, a crumpled raincoat was found. Investigators slid it open and confirmed it was designed as a flotation device. These discoveries sparked new questions. If the men drowned, where were the bodies? Even in the cold bay waters, a corpse would usually surface within days, but none did. That silence from the sea was unsettling. Back on the rock, guards stripped the men's cells completely, documenting every hidden crevice. In the hollowed accordion case, they found more scrap material. Inside a hidden compartment under the sink, wedged between rusted pipes, they discovered a spoon sharpened like a chisel. It was clear now this was a long, careful operation, and nothing had been left to chance. The FBI was officially called in, taking over from the prison's internal investigation. Their approach was methodical. They mapped the bay's tides for the night of June 11th, ran current models, and even released weighted dummies from Alcatraz to study drift patterns. The results were not encouraging for survival. The model suggested the raft could have been swept far out toward the Pacific. Yet there was something nagging at some investigators. The makeshift raft the Anglins and Morris had crafted was no crude lash-up. It was meticulously designed. The stitching in the seams of the raincoat panels was tight, almost professional. Whoever had helped them or taught them knew what they were doing. Rumors swirled. A Norwegian freighter crew claimed they'd seen a small boat moving near the bridge around 1 a.m., but couldn't confirm it. Someone in Marin reported hearing voices on the beach that night. A taxi driver swore he'd picked up nervous-looking men near the wharf early on June 12. The official narrative still leaned toward drowning, but among the officers who had worked the island for years, there was an uneasy whisper. Maybe, just maybe, the Anglin brothers and Frank Morris had done the unthinkable. By sunset, the search area was expanded out past the mouth of the bay. The hunt was now a race against time, not for capture, but for answers. And the three names at the heart of it were already slipping into legend. The rock had cracked. The sun was already low in the sky when the old key finally turned in the rusted padlock. The sound was sharp and final, like the closing of a chapter no one thought would end. Inside, the air was thick, stale, carrying the scent of dust, wood rot, and something far older. Lydia stood frozen in the doorway, her hand trembling on the frame, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The room wasn't empty. Against the far wall, a wooden chest sat half sunken into the floorboards, as though the house itself had tried to swallow it whole. She approached slowly, every step groaning under her weight. The chest was small, old, its brass hinges green with corrosion. She hesitated, then knelt. The lid creaked open, releasing a whisper of air that felt colder than it should have. Inside were bundles of letters tied neatly with frayed string, their edges yellowed. On top lay a single, leather-bound journal. Her pulse quickened. She knew whose handwriting it was before she even opened it. The first page stopped her cold. To the one who finds this, you were never meant to know the truth. But if you're reading, then I failed to keep it buried. The entries that followed painted a picture she couldn't unsee. Dates, names, locations, each one matching a moment she thought she understood from family history. The missing weeks, the unexplained trips, the hushed arguments she'd overheard as a child. They weren't coincidences. They were cover-ups. The journal detailed how her family had hidden a crime so terrible it should have destroyed them all. The hidden room hadn't been built for storage. It was a safeguard, a vault for secrets too dangerous to exist in daylight. One letter was addressed directly to her. She unfolded it with shaking hands.
Lydia, if this reaches you, I'm sorry. Everything we did, it was to protect you. But protection comes with a price. You will have to decide whether to carry this burden quietly or drag it into the light. Tears blurred her vision. Her heart hammered as the reality settled in. The mystery wasn't over, it had only shifted. The key she held no longer unlocked doors, but choices. From the doorway, sunlight spilled in, catching the floating dust motes like tiny sparks. She looked once more at the journal, the letters, the chest, then at the open door leading back to the world outside. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, not away from the truth, but straight into it. And that is where our story ends. A chilling reminder that sometimes the answers we search for can change everything we thought we knew. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves true crime, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story we uncover.